Hi, this is John Rowell for the Rowell Report. Today is Thursday, August 28th, 2025, and um, there was a big Russian missile and drone attack on Ukraine, um, especially the capital of Kyiv. And so there were 598 drones and 31 missiles that were launched into the country, and Ukraine reports that 563 of the 598 were brought down, as well as 26 missiles out of 31 missiles. So that leaves 5 missiles um, to have hit some target in Ukraine. So, anyway, let's take a closer look at this whole attack. So, first, we have a double strike of Kinjal missiles on a building, which many are saying is an apartment complex. So, the Kinjal missile costs approximately $10 million each one. This is an extremely expensive missile compared to the drones. So, if they're gonna, they hit this building with two missiles, which means that they spent $20 million to hit one or possibly several targets which were in this building. So anyway, I'm going to play this video here from BBC TV, BBC, from CCTV, which BBC is rebroadcasting. So let's take a look at the strikes. So anyway, first we have one massive strike, and there they show the missile as it hit the target. Now, a little bit after that, there was a so 540 was the first, um, and looks like a few seconds later there was a second strike on this target. So that's $20 million down the tube. Um, and so what we're being told is this was an exclusively residential building. So you're basically telling me that the Russians wasted $20 million, two very important missiles, on a random civilian apartment block in Kiev. I find that very hard to believe. So, anyway, I can bet that there was an important military target there. Now, the Ukrainians are mum about what that target was, and so they're not talking about what was in that building. The Russians aren't going to tell us what was in that building, because if they say what was in that building, possibly only a few people knew, so they could be revealing the identity of the person who tipped them off about what was in that building. In any case, let's take a look at the destroyed building. So this, I can say that this is the same building. Um, but anyway, this was one of the buildings that was destroyed in the missile attack. So you can see that the building wasn't exactly constructed very well. You see, it's just basically brick on top of brick. So once it was hit, it's kind of collapsed. Um, and you see more work of recovering survivors or bodies. And so here's the recovering a body from the rubble, and looks like another possibly body. There looks like, yeah, looks like a body bag. But anyway, um, the important thing is that um, if the Russians were using missiles to hit targets within Kiev, which has one of the best air defense systems in Ukraine. They weren't going to be throwing missiles into Ukraine to hit a random residential building. There was going to be a military target. I can bet that that was the case. So, in any case, the European Union leader, Ursula von der Leyen, um, condemned the attack. So, she's not saying what was in that building, nor is she admitting that it was a military target. Um, and so she's planning to bring forth another sanctions package against Russia the 19th. The 18th haven't worked, so we know the 19th is magically going to work. But I can give a guess that it will not work. In any case, let's move on here on this topic. We have the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres condemning the attack on civilians, but he does not mention that the Ukrainians put military targets in densely populated civilian urban areas. So it seems very one sided from him to be condemning attacks which hurt civilians. If he doesn't if he doesn't condemn the country that uses their own civilians as a kind of a human shield. So anyway, but Antonio Guterres is a very one-sided person, a very anti-Russian individual, and only pumps out Western-backed narrative. So this is kind of to be expected for him. He really has no other um, communication style regarding the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and doesn't admit any of the reasons why Russia is there in the first place. So let's move on. Now, what is the response from Moscow? The Russian Ministry of Defense said that it carried out a group strike using long range, high precision weapons. So they say high precision weapons. It means that they were targeting something very specifically, and then they dumped $20 million on one target. You know, two Kyiv missiles, which they used to um, uh, hit this target. So Russia says it only targets defense, industrial sites, and military air bases, um, and they do not target civilians. So this is the Moscow response. Of course, they're not going to say what they targeted, because if they say what they targeted, then that may give an indication of how they found out about this target, especially if only a few people knew about what was going on there. On the outside, you see that it's divided up into apartments, but an apartment can be offices, it can be military storage, they can have they can build drones there, they can build weapons there, they can do anything in that space. These are big apartments, and they could very adaptable for different things. So now let me take you to Mariupol in 2022. This is a scene from the Russian bombardment of Mariupol. As you can see here, there are many, many buildings which are tall, very well built buildings, unlike that building in Kiev. These are the Khrushchev buildings. They are built in concrete blocks put together kind of like Legos. And so these are very resistant buildings. It takes a lot to do any damage to them. So you can see that the buildings here were being bombarded. And so this is not because Russia targets civilians. It is because the Ukrainian military had hundreds or even thousands of soldiers stationed here. They had firing positions on the roof. they had military equipment parked below the buildings. So let's take a look at this area and you can see how well fortified it is and why the Ukrainian military chose this area to establish it as a fortified um, a fortified area. So here we go. You can see these buildings that were hit, and so we get a good idea that the Ukrainian military was in this area here. Now, if you look over these buildings to the right, these are like one-story wooden buildings. You don't see them being targeted at all. So anyway, because the Ukrainian military wouldn't use these positions to fire because they're not fortified and they're very low down. They can be targeted easily. If they're wooden, they can burn. These are all cement buildings. They're very well built, fortified areas, and you can see that there's a whole line of buildings, and this created a kind of a defensive line for the Ukrainian military. So, when people say that the Ukrainian military doesn't use civilian buildings for warfare, that is a lie. Now, if we go on here, we can see that Ukrainians do target civilians. Here is a video from Belgorod. This is from the video is from a couple weeks ago. I don't know when the attack came, but anyway, you can see here.
Russia's Belgorod region has once
You
again been
can see
attacked by
here a
Ukrainian
vehicle that
drones.
was targeted.
The governor of the region,
So that's a civilian vehicle just driving in the street. Um, okay, we also have here another
a series of
attack
explosions
on
rocked
a
Rostov-on-Don, a Russian
civilian
port
apartment
city in the
building,
administrative center
and
of Rostov
this
Oblast,
is in
overnight.
Rostov. So when they tell you that only Russians fire on civilians, they're not giving you any information that is correct. Um, Here is a report from the uh, Russian news agency called TASS. Ukrainian troops station mortars on top of high rises in Donbass. So if we go back to the um, drone footage here from Mariupol, um, we have eyewitnesses who later made videos, and they even recorded the Ukrainian military stationing military equipment trucks, howitzers, all sorts of military um, equipment below the buildings, and they were using the rooftops as firing positions. So anyway, this is more than confirmed. So anyway, if we go to Ellie from Russia, who is a YouTuber, she travels many parts of the world. Um, and she went to visit Belgorod a couple of days ago, and she interviewed a few people. Here is a taxi driver, and he's talking about the attacks on the civilians and just anybody in Belgorod. So he's giving the schedule of the attacks. So we can listen in, or I'll read off what he is saying. So anyway, he's saying that everyone is afraid. He said that the missile attacks were taking place 3 times a day. So this is attacks on Belgorod, just on any random person, civilians, people in the street, women, children. Um, and so he even gives the time of the attack. So at 8 a.m., at noon, and at 6 p.m. So 8, noon, and 6. Like clockwork, the Ukrainians were attacking the civilians in Belgorod, in Russia. And here is Ellie with a singer, a Russian singer, who was going to record a song on December 30th, and she was saved from an attack. She had some headphones on, so she wasn't even listening to the sound of the drone. But a woman and her child were going by, and they pulled her into the subway entrance, which is here to the right. And afterwards, right where she's standing, a missile came in, and many people were hurt. So I'm just going to advance this video a little bit so you can see the subway entrance. Um, and so I probably won't be able to get to that here. I don't know exactly when that starts. But anyway, it's important to remember the reason why this conflict began in the first place. So anyway, um, there was in 2019, Ukraine passed anti-Russian laws, and that outlawed Russian being taught in schools, Russian culture, Russian media. First, the Russian-owned media outlets, which were in Ukraine and the ethnic Russian areas, were shut down and pushed out of the country. And then the Ukrainian media that transmitted in Russian were shut down. So, um, as the Ukraine's as the Ukraine measures against ethnic Russians who were Ukrainians began to increase. There was a independent movement that started in these oblasts in the eastern part of Ukraine, and they tried to separate from Ukraine. President Putin tried to reconcile those ethnic Russians with the Ukrainian government, but the only thing that the Ukrainian government did was to send in the military and start shelling their cities, and there's a lot of information about that. Um, so anyway, this isn't like who you believe. There's evidence to show that Ukrainians do target civilians. Now, if um, Russians hit military targets in densely populated urban areas, and civilians are hurt, who's at fault? Is it Russia for firing the missile, or is it the Ukrainians for putting their population at risk? Then you have to think, why do the Ukrainians put these military targets in Kiev? Because Kiev is one of the best protected cities with air defenses. So anyway, I could be, here talking about this until I'm blue in the face. Uh, the people who hate Russia will always say that they just target civilians, and the civilians die because Russians are kind of trying to kill civilians. But if you really look into this issue, you will see that the Ukrainians put military targets in the middle of urban areas, and Russia targets them because what comes out of those factories or out of those military uh, areas are things or plans or something else which kill Russian soldiers. Um, so anyway, the Russian military has a right to go after those targets. It's a war. Both sides are attacking each other. So if we just give one-sided views on this conflict, that the Russians are evil, the Ukrainians are good, the Ukrainians have a democracy, Russia has a dictatorship. If you put out all these um, narratives which the Western countries have been putting out, um, you'll only go into one, you'll only come up with one conclusion, of course, the conclusion which you want to come up with. But if you look deeper into the topic, you will see that it's not so simple. And if the Ukrainians really wanted to protect their civilians, they would take those military targets, they would probably put them underground first off, in some hardened installation or site. But the fact that they put them among their population in densely populated areas shows that they care very little about their own population. But what they do want is for Russia to get a bad reputation of killing civilians, so they don't care. And this can be proven. So anyway, I thank you for joining me for today's video. If you have any comments, please do so below. I'll Constructive comments are very much appreciated. And if you'd like, you can sign up for my channel. I have a new channel, so I'd appreciate your subscription. And please let others know about this channel. If you really want to know what's going on, this is a good place to come. There are other channels as well. But anyway, there's plenty of information out there for you to really find out what's going on. And so anyway, I'll conclude the video here with that, and I wish everyone a great day. Take care.